beneath the layers of soil and the passing of countless centuries, there are places that seem to breathe with secrets older than our recorded memory. Sites that challenge what we think we know about the birth of civilization. One such place is whispered about in archaeological circles and folklore alike, a hill in West Java that might not be a hill at all, but a monument built tens of thousands of years before Egypt's first stones were laid. If true, it would mean our ancestors, long before the wheel, the written word, or the empires of antiquity, possessed skills and knowledge far beyond what history allows. Could they have mapped the stars with a precision we still marvel at today? Could they have harnessed the Earth's natural energies in ways modern science has only begun to rediscover? Or are these patterns and alignments simply the result of nature's own artistry, fooling us into seeing the hand of an ancient engineer? The truth, as always, waits somewhere between evidence and imagination, hidden in stone and shadow. Tonight we begin our descent into that mystery welcome to deformed history. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. In the highlands of West Java, where the morning mist curls like silver threads through the canopy and the cicadas hum in the distance, there lies a rise in the earth that villagers have walked past for generations. To the untrained eye, it is nothing more than a hill softened by time, crowned with grass, bamboo, and weather-worn stones. But in the stories told around fires on cool evenings, that hill is no ordinary place. They speak of it as Gunung Padang, the mountain of enlightenment, where ancient kings once built with the aid of spirits, where the stones themselves are said to hum when the night is still, and where the very ground is charged with energies that can heal the sick or reveal visions to the pure of heart. For centuries, these tales were part of the invisible map of the region, real to those who lived here, irrelevant to those who did not. But every legend waits for its moment to resurface, and this one found its way back into the light, not through the hand of a historian, but through the steps of farmers going about an ordinary day. In 1979, 3 men were tending to their fields along the hill's flanks, clearing brush and turning soil as their fathers had before them. It was then that they noticed something strange. Blocks of stone emerging from the earth in lines too precise to be natural. Their surfaces were flat, their edges deliberate, and together they formed patterns that hinted at terraces, stairways, and walls. These were not the scattered remnants of fallen rock. They were the bones of something made by human hands, something large, deliberate, and deeply buried. News traveled quickly to the Bureau of Archaeology in Bandung, and within weeks a team arrived to survey the site. They confirmed what the villagers suspected. This was a megalithic complex, layered and expansive, stretching across terraces like steps leading to the sky. Hundreds of basalt columns, some as tall as a man, others the size of a child, were arranged in formations that suggested ceremonial spaces or markers aligned with the heavens. Even then, the site's age was estimated conservatively, no more than a few thousand years. Archaeologists placed it within familiar timelines, a product of late megalithic builders who worked without metal tools, but with an intimate knowledge of stone. It was a neat conclusion. tidy enough to fit within the accepted story of human progress. But the hill had not yet given up its deeper secrets, and those secrets would prove far more disruptive. For in time, technology would allow scientists to see beneath the surface, peeling away layers of soil to reveal a history that stretched not thousands, but tens of thousands of years into the past. The first to push beyond the accepted view was a geologist named Dr. Danny Hillman Natawijaja, who came to Gunung Padang not as a treasure hunter or a seeker of lost civilizations, but as a man trained to read the Earth's subtle movements. His work had always been about fault lines and seismic risks, not myth or mystery. But when he examined the hill, something about its symmetry, its terraces, and the way the stone was placed tugged at his curiosity. It was not the work of nature's random hand. The lines were too straight, the arrangements too deliberate. And so he began to ask questions. Dangerous questions for a man trained to stay within the safe boundaries of geological explanation. In 2011, his team brought in ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and seismic imaging, tools designed to see through the Earth like X-rays through flesh. What they found defied expectations. Beneath the visible terraces lay deeper layers of construction. Compact stonework buried meters below the surface, their patterns as precise as anything above ground. Even deeper still, at depths of 15 meters, they detected chambers, rectangular spaces with sharp corners that nature does not easily make. Radiocarbon dating of organic material within the soil surrounding these structures returned dates that staggered the imagination. 25,000 to 28,000 years before the present. If those numbers were accurate, it meant that whoever built the deepest layers of Gunung Padang lived during the Upper Paleolithic, an age when mainstream history tells us humans were hunter-gatherers with no permanent settlements, let alone the ability to construct massive, multi-layered pyramids. The implications were explosive, and not everyone was ready to entertain them. Critics argued that the dates were misleading, that the organic material tested had nothing to do with human activity, that the stones might be naturally occurring volcanic columns rearranged by erosion or chance. But the radar images told another story, of voids too regular to be natural, of terraces aligned in ways that suggested astronomical intent, of construction phases stacked like chapters in a book far older than any library. And then there were the acoustic tests. When struck, certain stones resonated at specific frequencies, tones that matched musical scales known from the ancient world and even modern concert tuning. The idea that these frequencies were chosen deliberately, that they might have been used in ritual or even in construction itself, began to take root in the minds of those willing to think beyond conventional boundaries. For Dr. Hillman, the debate was not just academic. Every scan, every core sample, every vibration recorded seemed to hint at a larger story. A story in which Gunung Padang was not a lonely anomaly, but part of a network of ancient sites scattered across the globe, built by a civilization we have forgotten, or perhaps never recognized. The hill, once dismissed as a local curiosity, was becoming something more. A challenge to the linear march of history, a riddle carved in stone, and a reminder that the past is far less settled than we imagine. Yet, even as evidence accumulated, the project faced resistance. Papers were published, then retracted. Excavations were approved, then halted. The official reasons ranged from environmental concerns to methodological disputes, but among the public and the more adventurous corners of the scholarly world, whispers of suppression began to grow. Why, they asked, would anyone want to stop the work? Was it because the data was flawed, or because the conclusions, if confirmed, would force us to rewrite the very foundations of human history? The answers remain elusive, but the questions have only multiplied. And so Gunung Padang stands as it has for millennia, its terraces open to the sun, its secrets buried deep, its hum still faintly audible to those who listen closely. For the villagers, it is still the mountain of enlightenment, a place of power and memory. For scientists, it is a puzzle wrapped in controversy. And for the rest of us, it is an invitation to look closer, to question more, and to wonder what other stories lie hidden just beneath our feet. The story of Gunung Padang's rediscovery is as much about the present as it is about the past, for the forces that shape its fate are not only geological, but political, economic, and human. After the initial excitement of the 2011-2013 surveys, the site became the center of an unusual tug-of-war, a struggle between those who saw it as a national treasure to be protected and studied, and those who regarded it as little more than an overgrown rock formation best left to tourism brochures. In the years following Dr. Hillman's first revelations, the hill began to draw not just scientists, but television crews, foreign documentary makers, spiritual seekers, and conspiracy theorists. Each came with their own vision of what the terraces meant: a lost city of the Ice Age, a sacred site of the Sundanese kings, a prehistoric observatory, or even the remnants of technology left by beings from beyond our world. For the local community, the attention was a mixed blessing. On one hand, the influx of visitors brought money, work, and a sense of pride that their quiet corner of West Java had become the focus of global curiosity. On the other hand, the land was sacred, and its stones were not simply relics to be catalogued, but living parts of a tradition that stretched back through uncounted generations. Elders recalled the stories of King Siliwangi, the semi-mythical ruler who, according to legend, tried to build a palace here in a single night with the help of supernatural forces. At dawn, the palace remained unfinished, its terraces abandoned to time, a warning that some ambitions are meant to remain incomplete. To them, the arrival of drills, radar equipment, and excavation teams was both thrilling and unsettling. What might be uncovered? And what might be disturbed? From the perspective of archaeology, Gunung Padang presented an irresistible challenge. Its surface features matched known megalithic sites, yet its deeper layers hinted at something entirely unprecedented. The radar images alone suggested multiple construction phases, each one built upon the last, separated by thousands, or even tens of thousands, of years. Unit 1, the uppermost layer, was the visible terrace complex, likely shaped between 500 BCE and 1500 BCE. Beneath it, Unit 2 was revealed, a buried structure dated to roughly 7,500–8,300 years ago, during a time when much of the world was still in the grip of early Neolithic culture. And then came Unit 3, the deepest and most controversial layer, with radiocarbon dates suggesting an age of 25,000 to 28,000 years before present. If this was truly man-made, it meant that its builders lived during the height of the last ice age. The methods used to probe these layers were as modern as the site was ancient. Ground-penetrating radar painted images of subsurface structures with ghostly precision. Electrical resistivity tomography traced differences in conductivity that mapped voids and filled spaces. Seismic tomography sent controlled vibrations through the Earth, their echoes revealing walls, chambers, and densities. In combination, these technologies built a portrait of a hill that was not a hill at all, but a composite of natural volcanic core and human engineering, a monument rising from a foundation of both geology and intention. And yet, the more compelling the evidence, the more fierce the opposition became. Critics seized on the dating methods, pointing out that the radiocarbon samples were drawn from soil, not from directly datable artifacts such as charcoal from hearths or carved wood. Organic material, they argued, can move through soil over millennia, carried by water or root systems, contaminating the deeper layers. Without unequivocal proof that the dated material was in situ at the time of construction, the age claims, they said, were meaningless. Others dismissed the symmetrical anomalies seen in the scans as natural fractures in basalt, which often forms into hexagonal columns as it cools from lava. But to Hillman and his team, these objections ignored the bigger picture. The geometry of the voids, the arrangement of the terraces, and the composition of the mortar-like material binding the stones all pointed toward human intervention. The cement found in the deeper layers was not just mud or volcanic ash. Laboratory analysis showed it to be a blend of clay, silica, and iron oxides, heated to temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius to form a durable geopolymer. This was not the work of primitive foragers. And then there were the acoustic properties. Certain stones rang like bells when struck, producing tones at 440 hertz, the same pitch as the standard musical A used in orchestras today. Could it be coincidence? Or had the builders tuned the stones deliberately, perhaps for ritual, healing, or even as part of the construction process itself? These questions could have propelled the project into a golden era of research, but instead, in 2014, work at the site was abruptly halted. Officially, the resin was a combination of environmental concerns and a need for methodological review. Unofficially, rumors circulated of political shifts and economic pressures. The site sat near land with potential mining interests, and declaring it a protected heritage zone would complicate development. Internationally, some speculated that the halting of the digs was influenced by a desire to avoid inflaming debates over human history. Debates that, if Gunung Padang's claims proved true, would overturn much of what was considered settled fact. For nearly a decade, the terraces sat in a kind of suspended animation. The grass grew back over the excavation pits. The stones, as they had for thousands of years, weathered the sun and rain. Tourists still came, climbing the long stairway to the summit, pausing to catch their breath where the air seemed to hum faintly. But the deeper layers remained sealed away, their secrets intact. Then, in early 2025, the stillness broke. In February, Indonesia's Minister of Culture publicly called for renewed investigation of Gunung Padang, framing it as a matter of national heritage and scholarly responsibility. By July, the government announced a staged restoration project, beginning with non-invasive surveys, then moving cautiously toward excavation. The announcement ignited fresh waves of excitement and skepticism alike. For some, it was a long overdue chance to gather the evidence needed to settle the debate once and for all. For others, it was a political maneuver, leveraging the site's mystique to boost tourism and national pride. In the meantime, the theories surrounding the site have only multiplied. Some connect it to the submerged ruins of Yonaguni in Japan, to Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, and even to the mythical lost continents of Mu and Atlantis, proposing that these were all outposts of a single Ice Age civilization, destroyed in a cataclysm around 12,000 years ago. Others suggest extraterrestrial influence, pointing to the site's alignment with certain stars and its puzzling acoustic and magnetic anomalies. Skeptics, for their part, continue to insist it is a natural formation modified by later megalithic builders, with nothing more mysterious about it than the persistence of myth. Yet, whether you stand with the believers, the doubters, or somewhere between, there is no denying the pull of the place. To walk among its stones is to feel the weight of an unbroken chain of human presence. Generations who climbed its steps, touched its columns, and looked out over the valleys below. It is to be reminded that history is not a straight line, but a vast landscape full of peaks that rise unexpectedly from the fog of time. Gunung Padang may yet prove to be the highest of those peaks, or it may remain forever shrouded. Either way, its story is far from finished. The journey into Gunung Padang's depths is not only a matter of stone and soil, but of the people who have tried to read the messages hidden there. Among them, Dr. Danny Hillman Natawijaja remains the central figure, a man whose professional roots lie not in chasing mysteries, but in understanding earthquakes. Before the hill drew him in, his life's work had been the study of tectonic stress and fault lines, predicting where the earth might one day crack and swallow roads, homes, and lives. But in the early 2000s, he found himself in West Java, looking at a hill that seemed too symmetrical for chance. The local stories of an ancient palace, the precision of the terraces, and the presence of megaliths aligned in patterns no volcano could produce began to erode his skepticism. It was not the kind of evidence that would convince him on its own, but it was enough to make him wonder what lay beneath. By 2011, Hillman had assembled a small but determined team, drawing on experts in geophysics, archaeology, and soil science. They did not come with shovels and trowels alone, but with machines that could see into the earth without disturbing it. Ground-penetrating radar swept the terraces, sending pulses deep below and mapping their echoes. Electrical resistivity tomography traced how currents flowed, or failed to flow, through the ground, revealing hollow spaces. Seismic imaging charted how vibrations moved through stone, building a ghostly blueprint of what lay beneath their feet. The data that emerged did not paint a picture of solid, uniform geology. Instead, it revealed a complex, layered interior. Cavities shaped like rooms, dense blocks arranged with apparent intention, and strata stacked like pages in a book, each chapter written in a different age. The first layer, Unit 1, matched expectations. Basalt columns fitted into terraces, likely assembled between 500 BCE and 1500 BCE. But below that lay Unit 2, its stones packed tighter, its fill material different, and its estimated age far older, around 7,500 to 8,300 years before present. This was already remarkable. It placed construction here before many of the earliest known cities in the Fertile Crescent. Yet the real shock came with Unit 3, buried at a depth of 15 meters. Radiocarbon dating of organic material found in its compacted soils returned ages between 25,000 and 28,000 years before present, a time when much of the northern hemisphere was locked in ice, and human history, as taught in classrooms, had not yet reached the chapter on complex societies. Hillman knew the risks of making such claims, Extraordinary dates demand extraordinary proof, and even before the results were made public, he anticipated the wave of skepticism that would follow. Critics argued that radiocarbon dating of soil can be misleading, since organic material, like roots, plant matter, or charcoal, can migrate into older or younger layers over time. Without artifacts directly tied to the dated material, they said, the numbers meant little. But Hillman pointed to the physical arrangement of the layers, the consistent patterns in the scans, and the presence of a mortar-like substance binding the stones, a cement made from clay, silica, and iron oxides that required heating to hundreds of degrees Celsius. This was not random volcanic debris. This was construction. The cement was more than just a structural adhesive. Its composition hinted at technological understanding far beyond what is attributed to Paleolithic humans. Laboratory tests revealed properties similar to modern geopolymer concrete, resistant to water, durable in tropical climates, and, intriguingly, capable of conducting subtle electrical charges. This tied into another of the site's peculiar features, its acoustics. Some stones, when struck, rang at a precise pitch, 440 Hz, the standard tuning for the musical note, A today. Experiments showed that these tones resonated more strongly in certain spots, as though the arrangement of the stones amplified them. In buried chambers, these vibrations seemed to build into standing waves, lingering in the air like invisible architecture. If this was deliberate, it suggested that the builders had a mastery not only of stone and mortar, but of sound. Ancient myths around the world tell of stones that could be moved by song, of temples built to resonate with chants, of harmonics that could heal the body or open the mind. To modern science, these are metaphors or at best exaggerated accounts of ritual. But here, on a hill in West Java, there seemed to be physical evidence of a structure tuned like an instrument. Whether the purpose was ceremonial, practical, or something we can no longer imagine, the possibility was enough to capture the imagination of researchers and storytellers alike. By 2013, Hillman's findings had reached beyond Indonesia. International conferences invited him to present. Journalists sought interviews, and alternative history programs began featuring Gunung Padang alongside other controversial sites like Gobekli Tepe in Turkey or the Yonaguni Monument in Japan. In October 2023, a peer-reviewed paper detailing the site's multi-layered construction and dating was published in the journal Archaeological Prospection. For supporters, it was a milestone, a recognition that even if the conclusions were debated, the evidence was compelling enough for serious consideration. For detractors, it was a red flag, and by March 2024, the paper was retracted. The official reason was a methodological flaw. The dating of soil samples, they said, could not be directly linked to human construction. Without that link, the claims of Paleolithic engineering were unsupported. The retraction was a blow, but not a death sentence. In the world of archaeology, disputes over dating and interpretation are common, but Gunung Padang's case had another layer of complexity. Politics. Excavations had already been halted once before, in 2014, under a new government administration. Some suspected that this was to avoid conflict with mining interests in the region, or to sidestep the cultural and academic turbulence that such a discovery might cause. If the site truly predated the Egyptian pyramids by over 20,000 years, it would shift the center of early civilization from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, a geopolitical and cultural rebalancing with unpredictable consequences. Even so, the story refused to fade. By early 2025, renewed government interest signaled that the hill's long slumber might be ending. Plans were announced for a staged restoration, beginning with non-invasive surveys, perhaps with more advanced versions of the same technologies hillmen had used over a decade earlier. These would map the site in finer detail, identify promising areas for excavation, and, ideally, settle some of the debates over what was natural and what was man-made. Drones equipped with LiDAR could scan the hill's contours through the canopy. Hyperspectral imaging might detect chemical traces invisible to the naked eye. Muon tomography, particle detectors that read density variations, could confirm the size and shape of the suspected chambers without lifting a single stone. Meanwhile, the cultural and spiritual dimensions of Gunung Padang have only grown stronger. Pilgrims still climb its steps to leave offerings, to meditate, to touch the stones said to carry ancient energy. Tour guides weave the scientific findings into the old legends, blending data and myth into a single narrative that visitors can feel beneath their feet. For some, the site is proof of forgotten genius. For others, it is a sacred place that transcends the question of who built it and when. And for the researchers who return, it remains both a puzzle and a promise, an unfinished conversation between the living and the long gone. In this way, the hill stands as a mirror, reflecting not only the shadows of the past, but the ambitions and anxieties of the present. It invites us to imagine the unimaginable, to question the certainties we were taught, and to recognize that the line between legend and history is often drawn in pencil, not stone. Whatever the excavations of the coming years reveal, whether they confirm a Paleolithic masterpiece, a multi-phase monument of later eras, or something stranger still, Gunung Padang has already done what the best mysteries do. It has opened our eyes wider. If the stones of Gunung Padang could speak, they might tell a story that stretches across oceans. In the quiet moments at the summit, when the afternoon haze softens the distant ridges and the air hums with cicadas, it is easy to imagine that this place was never meant to stand alone. Across the world, scattered like beacons on the map of deep prehistory, lie other sites with peculiar similarities. Layered terraces, megalithic precision, astronomical alignments, and mysteries that have outlived their builders. For those who study such things, these echoes are not coincidence, but the remnants of a forgotten network, perhaps a civilization that rose and fell long before the earliest empires we know. One of the most intriguing of these parallels lies far to the northeast, beneath the waters off Yonaguni Island in Japan's southernmost chain. Discovered by a diver in 1986, the Yonaguni monument descends like a giant stone ziggurat into the blue. Its broad steps, sharp angles, and geometric planes seem almost too deliberate for nature alone, and yet the debate over its origin has raged for decades. Some geologists insist it is a natural sandstone formation, shaped by millennia of currents and tides. Others, like Professor Masaki Kimura, argue that the perpendicular cuts, platforms, and what appear to be roadways are unmistakably human in design. If so, then Yonaguni must date to a time before the sea rose to cover it, at least 12,000 years ago, during the last great melt of the Ice Age. The connection to Gunung Padang is not simply in the physical resemblance, but in the timing. Both sites, if the more daring interpretations are correct, belong to an era when much of the world's coastline was dramatically different, when Sunda Land, the now submerged continental shelf linking Indonesia to mainland Asia, was high and dry. In that world, sea routes and land bridges connected territories that are now islands scattered across the Pacific. It is not hard to imagine a maritime culture thriving along these shores, building monumental centers at strategic points, perhaps as way stations, observatories, or ceremonial hubs. What deepens the intrigue is that Yonaguni, like Gunung Padang, has hints of acoustic properties. Divers have reported unusual sound patterns near its terraces, amplified by the shape of the structures and the movement of the water. The idea that ancient builders might have understood not only the visual, but also the sonic resonance of their creations is a theme that crops up in many of these sites, from Malta's Hypogeum to the great temples of Egypt. Could these have been part of a shared body of knowledge, an ancient science of harmonics, passed along trade routes and adapted to local landscapes? Travel westward from Java, and the echoes continue in the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, where the site of Gobekli Tepe has been rewriting our understanding of prehistory since the mid-1990s. Here, circular enclosures ringed with towering T-shaped pillars date back to around 11,000 years ago, long before the invention of writing or the domestication of crops. The carvings on these stones, lions, scorpions, vultures, speak of a symbolic language rich with meaning. Like Gunung Padang, Gobekli Tepe appears to have been intentionally buried, preserved beneath layers of backfill for reasons we can only guess. Perhaps it was ritual closure, perhaps protection against an approaching disaster. Whatever the case, it mirrors the sense at Gunung Padang that what we see today is only the surface of something deeper. There are those who believe these sites, Gunung Padang, Yonaguni, Gobekli Tepe, and others, are not isolated marvels, but fragments of a single lost civilization. The names given to this hypothetical culture vary: Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria. In the Pacific, the legend of Mu speaks of a vast land that sank beneath the waves, its people scattering to the corners of the earth, carrying with them their knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and perhaps even energy. While mainstream geology rejects the idea of entire continents vanishing wholesale, it does not deny that massive tsunamis, rapid sea level rise, and catastrophic earthquakes have erased coastlines and drowned cities. In the lore of Mu, as popularized by early 20th century writers like James Churchward, the survivors fled to places as far apart as Easter Island, Central America, and Southeast Asia, seeding the great stone cultures of those lands. Skeptics dismiss this as romantic fantasy, born from a mix of mistranslated myths and colonial-era speculation. Yet, in the patterns of megalithic construction, the recurrence of spiral motifs, and the alignment of monuments with solstices and equinoxes, some see the fingerprints of a shared origin. Gunung Padang fits neatly into this narrative, not because it must, but because it can. Its terraces, aligned and layered, its possible connection to an ancient maritime landscape, and its enduring myths make it a natural candidate for inclusion in the great tapestry of prehistory's enigmas. Whether it was truly part of a global network or simply a local expression of universal human ingenuity, it stands as a reminder that the neat boundaries we draw around civilizations are often porous. Ideas travel, techniques migrate, myths echo. Back on the hill, the wind changes in the late afternoon, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint smoke of village cooking fires. The stones catch the low sun, their surfaces glowing with the warmth of the day. A visitor, standing here with no knowledge of the debates raging in journals and online forums, might simply feel a sense of calm, or perhaps a twinge of awe. They might walk the steps, pause at the flat platforms, and listen without knowing why to the faint hum beneath their feet. They might, without realizing it, be participating in a ritual older than any religion, the act of standing on ground that was shaped with purpose and wondering why. For the researcher, the hum is not metaphor, but data. In the coming restoration phases, acoustic mapping will be part of the non-invasive surveys. Sensitive microphones and vibration sensors will trace how sound moves through the structure, identifying points of resonance and amplification. If these patterns match certain star alignments or architectural features, it could strengthen the case for intentional design. For the skeptic, such findings may prove nothing more than coincidental effects of natural stone formations. For the believer, they will be one more piece of a puzzle that is slowly, perhaps reluctantly, revealing its image. And so the question of Gunung Padang's place in the world remains open. Is it a solitary masterpiece of a local culture, built and rebuilt over thousands of years? Is it a surviving fragment of a vast Ice Age civilization, connected by sea to distant lands now hidden beneath the waves? Or is it something stranger still? A palimpsest of human ambition layered over geological chance? A stage where nature and culture have collaborated to create the illusion of mystery? As with all the great sites of the ancient world, the answer may not be one or the other, but all of them at once. In the end, what matters is that the hill still stands, and that we are still asking questions. In the asking, we connect ourselves to those who stood here before us, who arranged these stones with an intention we may never fully grasp, but which continues to draw us upward, step by step, toward the summit. The mystery of Gunung Padang does not exist in a vacuum. It has unfolded within a landscape of human politics, cultural pride, and academic rivalry, as complex as the site's own layers of stone. To trace that thread, you have to go back to the years before its global fame, when the hill was known mainly to the villagers of Karyamukti and a handful of local scholars. In those days, the terraces were a curiosity, a place for rituals and school field trips, for whispered legends and quiet reflection. But every archaeological site that captures the imagination eventually becomes a stage, and once Gunung Padang stepped into the light, it found itself caught between competing narratives. On one side were the proponents, scientists like Dr. Hillman, investigative writers, and alternative history enthusiasts, who believed the site had the potential to rewrite the opening chapters of civilization's story. On the other were the skeptics, some from within Indonesia, others from universities half a world away, who warned that such claims rested on shaky evidence and could damage the credibility of the country's archaeological institutions. Between them stood the government, balancing heritage and tourism against scientific caution and political risk. The flashpoint came in 2023 with the publication of Hillman's paper in Archaeological Prospection. It laid out the case for Gunung Padang's three distinct construction phases: the visible terraces of Unit 1, the buried stonework of Unit 2, and the deepest core of Unit 3, dated to between 25,000 and 28,000 years before present. For those already inclined to see the site as a Paleolithic marvel, it was a triumph. peer-reviewed recognition that the data was worth serious consideration. For the critics, it was a red flag waving in the face of established timelines. Almost immediately, the arguments began. The dating methods were flawed, the interpretations overreaching, the correlations between soil samples and construction speculative at best. By March 2024, the journal retracted the paper. The official explanation was blunt. Without artifacts directly tied to the dated organic material, the link between the radiocarbon ages and human construction could not be proven. Hillman and his team protested, accusing the editors of ignoring supplementary evidence and yielding to political pressure. Supporters saw the retraction as a textbook case of academic gatekeeping, a refusal to entertain ideas that might topple the familiar sequence of history from its comfortable perch. Detractors called it a victory for scientific rigor, a reminder that extraordinary claims require airtight proof. The fallout reached far beyond the pages of an academic journal. Social media lit up with hashtags. Padang Truth, 28K years, Buried History, drawing in everyone from professional archaeologists to amateur sleuths, spiritual influencers, and conspiracy theorists. The debates spilled into YouTube documentaries, podcasts, and late-night talk shows. Some connected the site to Atlantis or Mu. Others suggested it was evidence of extraterrestrial contact, pointing to its acoustic anomalies and star alignments. Skeptics countered with detailed geological analyses, pointing out that volcanic basalt naturally fractures into hexagonal columns that can appear man-made. Amid all this noise, the government's role grew increasingly strategic. Indonesia had, for decades, sought to strengthen its cultural sovereignty, highlighting its heritage as equal to or surpassing that of Egypt, Greece, or Mesopotamia. Gunung Padang offered a unique opportunity to do just that, but it also carried risks. To officially endorse the 28,000-year-old claim without irrefutable proof could invite international ridicule. To dismiss it outright could mean passing up a chance to redefine the world's historical map. The solution was a cautious one. In February 2025, the Minister of Culture called for renewed investigation, framing it as both a scientific and a national endeavor. By July, plans for a staged restoration were announced, starting with non-invasive surveys and moving, perhaps, toward excavation if the results warranted it. This careful framing has not silenced the more speculative voices. Among alternative historians, the retraction of Hillman's paper is often cited alongside other controversial reversals in archaeology. The disputes over the age of the Sphinx's erosion patterns, the burial of artifacts from California's Calaveras skull case, the quiet shelving of anomalous finds that don't fit established timelines. The narrative is compelling. A global academic establishment suppressing evidence that challenges the orthodox model of slow, linear progress from primitive bands to advanced states. In this telling, Gunung Padang is just the latest in a long line of discoveries to be debunked, not because they are false, but because they are inconvenient. For the more cautious archaeologists, the problem is not conspiracy, but interpretation. They point out that much of the data from Gunung Padang remains ambiguous. Soil dating can be tricky. Radar scans can produce false positives. Acoustic resonances can occur naturally. They do not deny the site's significance. It is clearly the largest megalithic structure in Southeast Asia, but they resist the leap from that fact to the idea of an Ice Age civilization. They urge patience, rigorous methodology, and openness to multiple explanations. And yet, there is something about the site that resists patience. The steps themselves seem to urge you upward, each terrace promising a new vantage point. Standing on the highest platform, you can see the rolling hills stretch toward the horizon, a patchwork of forest, fields, and river valleys. In the distance, the peaks of dormant volcanoes pierce the haze, silent reminders of the forces that shaped this land long before any human hand laid a stone here. The basalt under your feet is ancient volcanic fire, hardened into columns that someone, or something, once gathered, shaped, and arranged. Whether that happened 3,000 years ago or 28,000, the human impulse to build, to align, to leave a mark is unmistakable. As the first stages of the restoration begin, drones sweep over the hill, capturing high-resolution topography. LiDAR beams cut through the canopy, mapping the site in fine detail. In laboratories, teams prepare to analyze soil chemistry, microfossils, and pollen grains from new core samples. In parallel, acoustic engineers plot a grid of microphones and vibration sensors, hoping to chart the structure's sonic fingerprint in 3 dimensions. The idea is to leave as much of the site undisturbed as possible, while still answering the questions that have fueled decades of speculation. The stakes are high, not only for the scientists, but for the villagers, the nation, and perhaps even for the broader understanding of human history. If the surveys find no evidence of artificial construction in the deepest layers, the narrative will shift toward Gunung Padang as a remarkable but relatively young megalithic site, its legend intact, but its revolutionary potential diminished. If, however, the scans confirm the existence of large regular chambers or walls far below the surface, and if datable artifacts can be linked directly to them, the implications will ripple far beyond Java. For now, Gunung Padang remains suspended between possibilities. It is a place where you can walk through the touchable past, steps worn by countless feet, and yet feel the pull of something further back, something almost out of reach. The hum of the stones may be the echo of ancient chants, or the resonance of volcanic basalt. The terraces may be the work of Ice Age engineers, or the descendants of a much later culture. But as long as the questions remain unanswered, the hill will keep its hold on those who seek it out. In the end, perhaps that is what draws people here more than anything else. Not the certainty of what it is, but the possibility of what it could be. The path to uncovering Gunung Padang's deepest secrets has always been shaped as much by human ambition as by the slow hand of time. In the years since its rediscovery, each wave of research has been a collision between curiosity and caution, between the hunger for revelation and the need to protect what remains undisturbed. But in 2025, as the Indonesian government cautiously reopens the conversation, the methods on the table reflect a new era of archaeological exploration, one that relies less on shovels and more on the invisible tools of physics, chemistry, and computation. This new phase begins not with excavation, but with listening. Acoustic mapping, long a side note in archaeological studies, is now moving to the forefront. Sensitive geophones are being planted discreetly across the terraces, their tiny sensors tuned to pick up vibrations far below the threshold of human hearing. A low thud on the surface might travel differently through a hollow chamber than through solid rock. A sweep of carefully calibrated frequencies might reveal which parts of the hill amplify sound and which swallow it. The hope is to create a three-dimensional sound map of Gunung Padang, much like a doctor uses an ultrasound to image the body. Early tests have already suggested anomalies, zones where tones seem to linger, reinforcing themselves in ways that could only occur in enclosed or partially enclosed spaces. At the same time, a small fleet of drones hums in the air above, each equipped with LiDAR sensors capable of penetrating the canopy to reveal the micro-topography of the hill. Every terrace, every slope, every subtle rise or depression is recorded in a cloud of millions of data points. Back in the lab, algorithms stitch these together into a model so precise that it can detect shifts of less than a centimeter. Overlaid with historical survey maps, the LiDAR images may reveal changes in the site's contours over decades or even centuries, hinting at areas where collapse or subsidence might have exposed deeper layers in the past. Beneath the surface, other technologies promise to go where even LiDAR cannot. Muon tomography, using cosmic rays to detect density differences within the hill, is slated to begin in the next phase. The method, famously used to find hidden chambers in Egypt's Great Pyramid, could determine with surprising accuracy whether large voids lie deep within Gunung Padang and how they are shaped. If the results match the rectangular anomalies seen in earlier seismic surveys, it would be the strongest non-invasive evidence yet that the hill conceals constructed spaces. But the most tantalizing prospect lies in the promise of datable material. If any of these suspected voids can be accessed without compromising the structure, and if within them lies preserved organic matter, charcoal from a fire pit, woven fibers from a mat, or even a fragment of wooden beam, then radiocarbon dating could finally tie the age estimates to human activity rather than surrounding soil. Such a find would not settle every argument, but it would strip away one of the skeptic's most persistent criticisms: the lack of a direct link between the deepest dates and human construction. Meanwhile, the cultural dimension of Gunung Padang remains as vivid as ever. Each week, villagers still climb the central staircase to leave offerings, flowers, incense, and small dishes of food for the ancestral spirits said to guard the place. The ceremonies blend Hindu-Buddhist elements with older animist traditions, their chants echoing across the terraces much as they might have in centuries past. In the evenings, when the light fades and the air cools, storytellers recount the tale of King Siliwangi's unfinished palace, a narrative that, in its own way, mirrors the current state of research. A grand vision halted before completion, leaving something enduring but incomplete. Tourism, too, is reshaping the site's future. The government's plans for restoration are partly driven by the potential for Gunung Padang to become a national icon alongside Borobudur and Prambanan. Carefully managed visitor pathways, interpretive centers, and augmented reality tours are all being discussed. These could allow travelers to see reconstructions of the terraces in their various phases: Neolithic, Mesolithic, and, if Hillman's theory holds, Paleolithic, layered like transparent skins over the hill's current form. Yet this commercialization carries its own risks. The pressure to create a compelling story for tourists might encourage oversimplification or even embellishment in ways that could further inflame the academic debates. Those debates, far from cooling, have been reignited by the renewed attention. In academic forums, some scholars argue that the focus on the site's possible Paleolithic origins is distracting from more certain and equally important questions, such as the cultural connections between Gunung Padang and other megalithic sites across Indonesia. Places like Panggoyangan, Lebak Sibedug, and even the distant Nias Island share features of terrace construction, stone alignment, and ritual use. Whether these represent independent traditions or the echoes of a shared heritage remains an open question. The web of speculation also extends far beyond Indonesia. Alternative history circles continue to link Gunung Padang to the global network of ancient anomalies. The drowned steppes of Yonaguni, the stone enclosures of Gobekli Tepe, the astronomical alignments at Giza, and the massive basalt constructions of Nan Madol in Micronesia. In these narratives, the hill becomes a surviving node in a prehistoric world system that collapsed in the great cataclysms at the end of the last ice age. Here, the debates turn not only on archaeology, but on geology, astronomy, and even astrophysics, with theories ranging from comet impacts to solar flares to the intervention of extraterrestrial intelligence. Back on the ground, away from the noise of online forums, the reality is quieter, slower, and more tactile. The sun rises over the terraces, casting long shadows across the stone columns. The wind carries the smell of rain from the mountains. A researcher kneels by a basalt block, running her fingers along the hexagonal edge, feeling the smoothness where centuries of weather and human touch have worn it down. A villager passes by, nodding politely, and continues up toward the top, where a small group has gathered for a prayer. In this moment, the clash of theories feels far away, and the hill is simply what it has always been, a place where human presence meets the enduring strength of stone. Yet even here, the questions press in. If the deepest layers are truly as old as the tests suggest, who built them? How did they quarry and move such massive stones without the wheel, draft animals, or metal tools? Did they understand the acoustic properties of the basalt? Did they align the terraces to the stars with intent? Or is the pattern an accident of placement? And if such a civilization existed in West Java during the Ice Age, why does it leave so little trace elsewhere? No sprawling cities, no vast cemeteries, no written records. These questions may never be answered to everyone's satisfaction. But perhaps that is the point. Sites like Gunung Padang exist at the edge of our knowledge, where the lines between science, myth, and imagination blur. They remind us that the past is not a fixed story written in stone, but a living dialogue between the traces we can measure and the possibilities we can dream. And so the hill waits, its terraces holding their lines against the pull of time, its buried chambers, if they exist, sealed against the probing of tools and theories alike. Above, the drones continue their quiet circuits. Below, the vibrations of the earth carry whispers through the stone. And somewhere in between, the human story continues to unfold, one question at a time. Night falls differently on Gunung Padang. In the day, its terraces are defined by shape and shadow, by the sharp angles of basalt against the green slopes. But after sunset, when the air cools and the forest begins its chorus of nocturnal life, the site takes on another presence, less a place of stone and soil, more a vessel of sound and memory. The villagers say the hill speaks most clearly at night. Some claim to hear faint drumming carried on the wind, others the murmured cadence of a language no one can name. Whether these are echoes of ritual or simply the play of wind through stone, it is easy to believe that something of the past still lingers here. Researchers have taken advantage of these quiet hours to run the most sensitive acoustic tests. Without the interference of tourist footsteps or the rustle of midday breeze, they can measure how even a whispered note travels across the terraces. Sometimes, a single clap in the lower level sends a crisp echo up to the top, as if the hill itself were answering. Other times, sound vanishes abruptly, swallowed by invisible boundaries, as though parts of the structure were designed to dampen noise entirely. This duality, amplification and silence, has intrigued engineers and historians alike. In ancient cultures, such properties were rarely accidental. They often played a role in rituals, in communication, or in the symbolic separation of sacred spaces from the mundane. These experiments have given rise to a tantalizing hypothesis that the hill's builders may have understood and deliberately shaped its acoustic profile. In a world without modern amplification, controlling how sound moved through a space could have been a powerful tool. Priests chanting in one terrace might be heard clearly in another, hundreds of feet away, while remaining inaudible to those standing just beyond a certain line. In ceremonial contexts, this could elevate the experience into something transcendent, a merging of architecture, landscape, and performance into a single act. But the night reveals more than sound. Under the sweep of the stars, the alignments that researchers have mapped by day come alive with startling clarity. Standing on the uppermost terrace, one can see how certain edges and sight lines correspond with the rise or set of key celestial bodies. The belt of Orion passes cleanly between two prominent stones. The bright pulse of Sirius hovers just above the horizon, notch to the southeast. The Pleiades cluster appears framed between upright pillars. These alignments are not fixed forever. The slow wobble of Earth's axis shifts them over millennia, but computer simulations suggest that they would have been even more precise tens of thousands of years ago, aligning with the very dates Hillman's deepest core samples proposed. If this is coincidence, it is an extraordinary one. If it is intentional, it places the builders in a tradition of sky watching and cosmic mapping that stretches from the stone circles of Britain to the pyramids of Egypt, from the earthworks of the Americas to the desert lines of Nazca. In such a context, Gunung Padang becomes more than a local anomaly. It becomes a chapter in a global story of humans looking upward, finding meaning in the patterns above, and shaping the world below to reflect them. Yet these connections carry their own danger. The temptation to overfit the evidence, to see deliberate intention in every alignment, to weave a narrative that spans continents without hard proof, is strong. Archaeologists warn against projecting modern star maps backward onto ancient sites, pointing out that cultural constellations differ widely across time and place. The Orion of today's sky may not have existed in the minds of Gunung Padang's builders. The bright points we recognize could have formed entirely different shapes in their cosmology. Without inscriptions or clear symbolic art, any claim of astronomical design remains provisional. Still, the romance of the idea persists. There is something deeply human in imagining an Ice Age priest or engineer standing on this same hilltop, gazing at a sky unpolluted by modern lights, mapping its rhythms against the turning of the seasons. in that moment, we are reminded that the urge to measure, to align, to mark the passage of time through celestial motion is as old as curiosity itself. Down in the village, the night carries on in simpler ways. Lanterns glow in wooden houses, cooking fires send thin columns of smoke into the dark, and the rhythmic chirp of crickets merges with the occasional bark of a dog. Some of the older residents say that when they were children, no one spoke of the site in terms of ages or civilizations. It was simply an old, important place where certain things were done in certain ways because that was how they had always been done. For them, the debates swirling in faraway universities matter less than the continued life of the place. That offerings are still made, that respect is still shown, that the terraces remain intact for the next generation to climb. This continuity is, in its own way, as remarkable as the archaeological puzzles. The hill has been many things over its long life, perhaps a sacred complex for an Ice Age society, perhaps a fortified settlement in a later era, perhaps a ritual site maintained through centuries of shifting beliefs. Through it all, the act of climbing, of ascending step by step toward the summit, has endured. Whether the ascent was once an initiation rite, a pilgrimage, or simply a practical way to reach the top, the movement itself binds past and present in a single shared experience. By midnight, the research team packs up their instruments, careful not to disturb the arrangement of stones. The forest reclaims the quiet. Overhead, the Milky Way drapes itself across the sky, a river of light flowing from horizon to horizon. For a moment, standing among these ancient columns, it is possible to feel suspended in time, neither wholly in the present nor entirely in the past, but in a liminal space where both coexist. It is in such spaces that the imagination flourishes. Here, speculation and evidence dance together, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict, always moving toward some elusive truth. The hill offers no easy answers, but it offers the possibility of answers. And perhaps that is why, even after years of study and argument, people continue to return. Tomorrow, the terraces will again echo with footsteps. Researchers will resume their measurements, villagers will climb with offerings, and the slow work of piecing together the hill's story will continue. Somewhere beneath the basalt, if the hypotheses are correct, lies a chamber untouched for tens of thousands of years. And if that chamber exists, and if it holds what some hope it does, then one night in the near future, the hill may speak more clearly than it ever has before. The next morning arrives with a mist that clings to the terraces, softening the edges of the stones until they seem less like deliberate architecture and more like a natural outgrowth of the hill itself. The sun, hidden at first, emerges slowly, and with it the research team begins their ascent. Today's goal is not grand discovery, but the careful repetition of measurements, a discipline that feels almost monastic in its patience. Each reading is taken, logged, and cross-checked because in a site where interpretations can hinge on the smallest irregularity, precision is not just important, it is the entire foundation of the work. Among the team is a geologist named Ratna, who has spent the past decade studying volcanic stone formations across Indonesia. She walks the terraces with a practiced eye, noting the subtle variations in basalt columns. Here, a hexagonal block still sharp-edged, suggesting minimal weathering. There, a smoothed surface that could be the result of centuries of human contact. Ratna's role is both crucial and contentious. Her expertise allows her to differentiate between stones shaped by volcanic cooling and those possibly modified by human hands. But each conclusion she draws feeds directly into the larger debate about the site's origins. To some critics, basalt columns can easily be mistaken for man-made structures when in fact they are natural features. In places like the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland or the Devil's Post Pile in California, nature herself has crafted formations that could pass for deliberate engineering. Ratna is aware of this and works to strip away bias from her observations. Still, as she kneels to trace her fingers over a joint between two columns, so tight, and even it looks as if cut with a blade, it is hard not to imagine the hand of an ancient mason fitting stone to stone. Nearby, Hillman's seismic team prepares to rerun their ground-penetrating radar sweeps. The hill has a way of confounding instruments, producing anomalies that shift subtly with the angle of approach or the season's moisture content. This variability is one reason skeptics urge caution. Repeated anomalies might point to something solid beneath, or they might simply reflect the complexities of layered volcanic deposits. Today's readings, taken in the dry season, will be compared to those from the wet months, in hopes that consistent patterns will emerge. As the day warms, the village begins to stir. A group of schoolchildren arrives on a field trip, their voices bright against the muted hum of research activity. They climb the central staircase with a mixture of awe and mischief, some pausing to pose for photos, others running ahead to claim the best view from the top. The guides, older men from the community, tell them stories of King Siliwangi, of how he tried to build a palace here in a single night. In these tales, the terraces are less a mystery to be solved than a testament to ambition itself. A reminder that even kings must yield to the limits of time and circumstance. It is this interplay between the scientific and the folkloric that gives Gunung Padang its layered identity. For every precise measurement or chemical assay, there is a parallel narrative carried by memory and tradition. Neither cancels the other. Instead, they coexist, each offering a different kind of truth. The scientists might measure the age of charcoal fragments to within a century, but only the stories explain why those fires were lit, who gathered around them, and what was spoken in their light. In the afternoon, the team shifts to a different section of the hill, one less visited by tourists. Here, vegetation has begun to reclaim the terraces, moss spreading in thick green patches, small trees taking root in the cracks between stones. Clearing these areas for study is a delicate matter. Too much removal risks destabilizing the structure, too little leaves important features hidden. Volunteers from the village assist, working with machetes and hand tools, their rhythm steady but unhurried. As one elder remarks, "The stones have waited this long. They can wait a little longer." Among the overgrowth, a curious find emerges. A small pile of broken stone pieces, their edges worn but still distinct. They seem to have been deliberately gathered, perhaps for repair work in centuries past, perhaps for some abandoned construction. Finds like this rarely make headlines, but to the trained eye, they speak volumes about the site's use over time. A place that is repaired is a place still valued. Maintenance itself is a form of reverence. By late afternoon, the light begins to slant, casting long shadows across the terraces. The research team gathers to review the day's data. Early impressions suggest some consistency with prior seismic anomalies, but until the results are fully processed, no conclusions will be drawn. In science, especially here, restraint is a kind of discipline. Premature claims have already clouded Gunung Padang's reputation once. No one on this team wishes to add to that. As work winds down, a few members linger at the summit. From here, the surrounding landscape rolls away in waves of green, the mountains in the distance draped in haze. It is easy to see why this hill would have been chosen for something important. Its vantage offers not just strategic oversight of the valley, but also a sense of separation from the ordinary world below. Standing here, one can imagine processions climbing the steps, the sound of drums and chanting carrying up the slope, the moment when participants emerged into this open space to witness the sky and the horizon merge. Night will fall again soon, and with it the hill's other face, the quiet, resonant, star-marked place that has drawn people back for generations. The instruments will rest, the researchers will sleep, and the stones will remain as they have for untold centuries, holding their secrets in patient silence. Perhaps tomorrow will bring a breakthrough, a clearer signal from the subsurface scans, a datable artifact from a newly exposed layer, a pattern in the alignments too precise to dismiss. Or perhaps tomorrow will simply bring more questions, more measurements, more steps along a path with no visible end. Either way, the work will continue, because here, at the meeting point of earth, stone, and human imagination, even the smallest piece of new understanding feels like treasure. And so, as the sun dips and the last of the light fades from the terraces, the day closes not with resolution, but with renewal, the certainty that whatever the hill's true story may be, it is far from finished. The following day begins with a faint drizzle, the kind that hangs in the air without ever quite becoming rain. The terraces glisten under the thin sheen of moisture, and the steps feel slick beneath the boots of the researchers as they make their way up. Mist curls around the higher stones, softening the edges until the whole site seems to hover in a half-seen world between waking and dream. It is weather that suits Gunung Padang, for this place has always existed in a haze of uncertainty, its facts and its legends forever entangled. Today's agenda is ambitious. Hillman has arranged for a collaborative session between his core team and a visiting group of archaeologists from Yogyakarta, specialists in early Javanese culture. The goal is to see whether material from Gunung Padang's upper layers can be linked, stylistically or technologically, to known sites in central Java. While the deep layers remain the most contentious, the upper terraces, dated to roughly 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, might hold clues about who maintained or repurposed the site in more recent times. If connections can be established, it would place Gunung Padang within a broader cultural network, one that could explain at least part of its long history. The visiting team arrives mid-morning, bringing with them cases of reference photographs, portable microscopes, and a small but specialized set of tools for analyzing wear patterns on stone. Within an hour, the summit has become a quiet hive of activity. One group kneels to study the chisel marks on a fallen column. Another carefully examines the lichen growth on a surface that may have once been polished. The conversation flows easily, though always tinged with that mix of excitement and restraint that defines fieldwork in a place where even the smallest claim can become a lightning rod. As the day goes on, intriguing details emerge. Some of the stones in the upper terraces appear to bear patterns of tool marks that differ from those on the lower levels. Less precise, more irregular, perhaps reflecting a later phase of repair or reconstruction rather than original building. A fragment of pottery found embedded in one of the terrace walls offers a tantalizing possibility. If it can be linked to a known style or production site, it might anchor at least part of Gunung Padang's chronology in the web of island Southeast Asia's cultural exchanges. Down in the lower terraces, Ratna continues her geological survey, now accompanied by two of the visiting archaeologists. They pause at one particularly massive basalt block, its sides weathered but still showing faint traces of what might be shaping. One of the visitors remarks that in the temple complexes of central Java, basalt was rarely used in such large monolithic forms. Instead, stones were cut smaller for easier handling. Here, by contrast, the scale is imposing, almost defiant, as if the builders were making a statement through sheer mass. By midday, the drizzle lifts, and the clouds break just enough to let sunlight dapple the terraces. In this shifting light, the contours of the site seem to change. Edges sharpen, shadows deepen, and details that were invisible in the morning become suddenly clear. One researcher, scanning the area with a drone-mounted camera, notices that certain terrace lines align not just with each other, but also with distant ridges on the horizon. It is the kind of observation that could feed either a careful topographic study or a sweeping speculative theory, depending on who is listening. In the early afternoon, the teams gather beneath a canopy to compare notes. Hillman is careful to keep the discussion grounded. The pottery shard will go to the lab for dating and compositional analysis. The tool marks on the stones will be catalogued and compared with regional examples. The drone imagery will be processed for precise measurements before anyone talks about alignments. The visiting archaeologists agree, though one admits that the temptation to draw connections, to imagine processions walking along sight lines to sacred peaks, is almost irresistible. Later, as the visiting team begins their descent, Hillman walks with them partway down the steps. They talk about collaboration, about the need for shared data, about how too often sites like this are studied in isolation. There is a sense that Gunung Padang's story might be best told not as a singular anomaly, but as part of a tapestry of places, some monumental, some modest, that together chart the movement of people, ideas, and traditions across the islands. When the visitors are gone, the hill grows quiet again. The core team lingers at the summit, reviewing the day's photographs. One image in particular draws attention. A close-up of a weathered stone face, its surface broken by deep grooves that run in parallel lines. Are these the result of ancient shaping, or the slow, patient work of water and root? It is the kind of question that cannot be answered in the field, yet it becomes another thread in the growing weave of possibilities. By late afternoon, the mist begins to roll back in, curling up the slopes and over the terraces. The air smells of damp earth and moss, and the sounds of the forest grow louder. The trill of birds, the drone of insects, the rustle of leaves stirred by unseen movement. In moments like this, the hill feels alive, as if it were aware of the people treading its surface and the questions they carry. As the team packs their equipment, one of the younger researchers pauses to look out over the valley. The mist has settled low, leaving only the higher ridges visible, like islands adrift on a white sea. She wonders aloud what this landscape might have looked like 10,000 years ago, when sea levels were lower and the outlines of the islands were different. Could Gunung Padang have stood as a landmark in a broader, more connected world? A beacon for travelers moving across what is now open water? The question hangs in the air, unanswered but not dismissed. Back in the village that evening, the researchers gather for a simple meal. Outside, the rain begins again, steady and unhurried. The conversation drifts between the day's findings and plans for tomorrow, but always returns to the same undercurrent. The sense that they are circling something, drawing closer, but never quite reaching the center. It is both the frustration and the allure of Gunung Padang, that it offers just enough to keep the search alive, but never enough to end it. When they return to the site tomorrow, the stones will be the same as they have always been. The terraces will still hold their lines against the slope. The moss will still creep across their surfaces, and the questions will still be waiting. The hill is in no hurry. It has outlasted generations of builders, worshippers, and seekers. It will outlast many more. And yet, for those who come here, each day feels like a step toward something. Not an answer, perhaps, but a deeper understanding of the questions themselves. The morning of the 10th day greets the hill with a clarity rare in this highland region. The air is crisp, washed clean by the night's rain, and the terraces gleam dark against the saturated green of the slopes. From the summit, the view stretches far into the distance, every ridge and valley etched sharply against the horizon. For the research team, such weather is a gift. Perfect conditions for aerial mapping and photogrammetry, techniques that rely on unobstructed light and minimal haze. The drone operators set up near the upper platform, calibrating lenses and adjusting flight paths. Each programmed run will capture thousands of overlapping images, later stitched together to form a three-dimensional model of the site. These models allow researchers to see the terraces in ways impossible from the ground, to detect subtle shifts in alignment, to measure the angle of slopes with millimeter precision, to trace patterns that might be invisible at eye level. As the drones lift into the sky, their quiet hum mingles with the calls of distant birds, the sound oddly modern against the ancient stones. Meanwhile, in the lower terraces, a small excavation unit resumes work on a trench that has been slowly peeling back the soil layer by layer. Here, progress is measured not in meters, but in centimeters, each trowel scrape revealing either nothing at all or something that could shift the conversation entirely. This morning, the team uncovers a cluster of small charcoal fragments, nestled between stones in what appears to be an ancient fill layer. The pieces are carefully bagged, labeled, and logged. The promise of radiocarbon dating held in each blackened shard. Hillman arrives mid-morning, moving between the trench and the drone station, checking on progress. He is deliberate in his movements, his attention split between the day's immediate tasks and the larger picture that has driven his years-long pursuit here. For him, the deepest layers remain the true prize, but he knows that the upper levels and their artifacts are what will bridge the gap between the site and the academic world. Hard data, reproducible results, peer-reviewed publications. These are the stepping stones that lead toward broader acceptance, even if the journey takes years. By midday, the first drone flights are complete, and the operators bring their equipment back under the canopy to begin preliminary processing. The images are crisp, the light perfect, the coverage thorough. As the software begins to render the early models, faint lines emerge, geometric outlines beneath the visible terraces, suggestions of structures or boundaries now buried. The patterns are subtle, easily dismissed as natural contours, yet they stir the room. Even the most cautious eyes linger on the screen a moment longer than necessary. In the excavation trench, the work slows as the team encounters a compact layer of stone fragments, too irregular to be paving, too deliberate to be random. It could be the remains of a collapsed wall or an intentionally laid foundation. Ratna kneels beside it, brushing away the last of the soil, her trained gaze parsing each fragment's texture and shape. She notes that some pieces bear scorch marks, not the diffuse staining of long exposure to the elements, but the sharp discoloration of intense, concentrated heat. Were these stones part of a hearth, a kiln, or the aftermath of destruction? The answer lies somewhere in the lab reports yet to come. By afternoon, the light takes on a golden warmth, and the terraces seem to glow from within. The team takes advantage of the calm weather to conduct another set of acoustic tests, this time from a terrace not previously examined. A small speaker emits controlled tones while sensors placed at various points record how the sound moves. The results are immediate and striking. Certain frequencies carry far beyond what is expected, while others seem to vanish into the slope. One researcher smiles, murmuring that the hill has its own voice, and it chooses when to speak. As the sun begins to lower, Hillman calls the team together for a brief discussion. They review the day's finds, the charcoal fragments, the stone layer with scorch marks, the promising drone imagery. None of it is definitive, yet each piece fits into the growing mosaic of the site's complexity. There is no single narrative yet, only overlapping possibilities, each supported by some evidence, each challenged by other interpretations. In the quiet after the meeting, some of the team remain at the summit, gazing out at the landscape. The horizon burns orange and pink, the sun's final light catching the peaks in the distance. One of the younger archaeologists reflects aloud on the human impulse to build in such places, not merely for defense or practicality, but for the view, for the alignment with something beyond the daily grind of survival. Perhaps, she suggests, the builders of Gunung Padang sought not only to shape the earth beneath their feet, but also to frame their place beneath the sky. By the time the team begins their descent, the first stars are already visible. The hill falls into shadow, its terraces merging with the slope until they are indistinguishable in the dark. Down in the village, lights flicker on, and the smell of cooking fires drifts upward. The day has yielded no dramatic revelation, yet the sense of momentum is undeniable. Step by step, scan by scan, fragment by fragment, the picture sharpens, not to a single truth, but to a richer field of possibilities. And that, perhaps, is the real allure of Gunung Padang. Not the promise of one final answer, but the unfolding of a story in which each layer reveals another beneath it, like the stones of the hill itself. The work is far from done, but as the night deepens and the constellations wheel overhead, the team rests knowing that tomorrow will bring them one step closer, not to the end of the mystery, but to its heart. The next dawn breaks with a pale silver light, the sky washed clean of clouds, and the air carrying the sharp scent of wet leaves. Gunung Padang rises quietly from the surrounding mist, its terraces like steps carved for a giant, each holding the memory of countless seasons. The research team begins the climb in near silence, the morning stillness almost ceremonial. It is a day set aside for deep core sampling, work that moves slowly, with the patience of both geology and archaeology. The drilling rig, positioned on a flat section near the upper terraces, stands out starkly against the ancient stones. It is modern, functional, unapologetically mechanical, its spinning bit a reminder that even the most careful research requires a certain violence to the earth. Hillman oversees the setup, his eyes scanning the alignment, making sure every angle is correct. The goal is to extract a continuous cylinder of soil and stone from deep within the hill, layer upon layer, each one a page in the geological record. The process begins, the low grind of the drill cutting through the morning air. The first meters come easily, loose soil, weathered stone. Then the resistance grows as the bit meets denser material. The extracted core is carefully removed, placed in labeled segments, and laid out on a table beneath the canopy. The sequence is immediately visible, the dark, organic, rich topsoil. Beneath it, compacted layers of volcanic ash. Deeper still, tightly packed stones bound by hardened sediment. The stratigraphy speaks in its own language, and Ratna is fluent enough to begin an initial translation. As the drilling continues, the team gathers around the growing line of core samples. In one section, a fine band of charcoal appears, so narrow it might be overlooked without a trained eye. It is the kind of find that could yield precise dating, placing an event, perhaps a fire, perhaps a deliberate burning, firmly within a span of centuries or even decades. Hillman marks it for immediate priority analysis. By mid-morning, the drill reaches a depth where anomalies were previously detected in the geophysical scans. The material here is different. Larger, more angular stones, their surfaces surprisingly clean despite their burial. One piece in particular, a fragment the width of a hand, shows a straight edge and a corner that could not be mistaken for random fracture. It is not conclusive proof of human shaping, but it is enough to draw a quiet murmur through the team. Meanwhile, in another corner of the site, a smaller group works with a magnetometer, tracing subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field. The readings are delicate, susceptible to interference from even a stray metal tool, but the operators move with practiced care. The map they produce shows faint anomalies aligned along what could be an ancient pathway or wall line, leading away from the main terraces into the forest beyond. Whether these readings point to buried stone, burned earth, or some other feature remains to be seen, but the alignment is intriguing. As the sun climbs higher, the drilling slows. Each additional meter takes longer, the resistance growing as the bit chews through increasingly compacted layers. The work is hot and methodical, punctuated only by the occasional call to fetch water or adjust equipment. By early afternoon, the team has reached the day's target depth. The final core is extracted, its lower section heavy and cool to the touch, the stone within darker than the layers above. It is logged, sealed, and placed with the others. A vertical slice of time now ready for the slow, meticulous examination that will follow in the lab. The drilling rig is dismantled with care, each piece cleaned and packed away. The ground where it stood is lightly covered to prevent erosion, a gesture of respect to the site. Hillman lingers, his hand resting on one of the terrace stones as he speaks quietly to Ratna about the next steps. They will send the cores to multiple laboratories. No single test, no single institution. In a place where every claim is scrutinized, redundancy is both a safeguard and a statement. By late afternoon, the team shifts their attention to the forested slopes below the terraces. Guided by the morning's magnetometer readings, they push into the undergrowth, machetes clearing the path. Here, the ground is uneven, dotted with boulders half buried in the soil. Some are clearly natural, their forms dictated by the slow cooling of basalt. Others seem almost placed, their arrangement too neat to dismiss entirely. The forest hums with insect life, the air thick and warm, the light filtering green through layers of leaves. At one point, the group halts before a large, flat stone, its surface tilted at a gentle angle. Moss covers much of it, but a patch of bare rock shows faint parallel grooves, weathered yet distinct. One of the younger researchers runs a hand over them, noting their regular spacing. They could be the result of ancient tool work or the long abrasion of roots and water. Photographs are taken, measurements logged, and the stone marked on the site map for further study. As evening approaches, the team makes their way back up the slope. The sky has shifted to a muted gold, the light slanting through the trees, catching in the mist that rises from the valley. The terraces emerge from the foliage, like the edge of another world, their lines sharp against the softening dusk. The day's work has yielded no single revelation, but it has deepened the sense of a layered, complex history, one in which natural forces and human hands may have worked side by side over millennia. In the village that night, over simple plates of rice and vegetables, the team discusses the possibilities. The magnetometer anomalies, the charcoal bands in the cores, the angular stone from deep within the hill. Each could be a thread leading toward a larger understanding. Or each could be a coincidence, an echo of geology mistaken for the voice of an ancient builder. That uncertainty, far from discouraging them, is what keeps them returning. Later, as the lights in the village go out and the night wraps itself around the hill, the terraces lie silent once more. The cores, packed and ready for transport, rest in their crates, a record of time compacted into stone, waiting for the slow unspooling of analysis. Above, the stars wheel in patient arcs, the same sky that may have looked down upon the hill's first shaping, whether by nature, by people, or by both. And in that quiet, the mystery feels not smaller, but larger, its depth measured not only in meters of stone, but in the centuries of questions still to be asked. The morning mist is dense enough to bead on the eyelashes as the team ascends, every breath pulling in the cool scent of damp stone and vegetation. Today is different. Not just another day of excavation or measurement, but a chance to follow a lead from the magnetometer readings taken 2 days before. The faint anomalies, mapped in thin lines that seem to trace an invisible path down the slope, have stirred a quiet excitement. If they correspond to buried structures or alignments, they might extend Gunung Padang's story beyond its terraces, into the surrounding hills. The trail is narrow, barely more than a deer path winding between ferns and thick undergrowth. Hillman leads, machete in hand, the blade flashing briefly in the muted light as he clears a way forward. The air here is heavier than on the terraces, dense with the smell of wet leaves and earth. Bird calls echo from somewhere deep in the canopy, punctuated by the occasional rustle of something unseen moving through the foliage. After half an hour, the team reaches a small clearing where the forest floor feels unnaturally flat. It is not the gentle slope of the hillside, but a level expanse roughly rectangular in shape. Moss-covered stones jut from the ground at irregular intervals, their arrangement suggestive, but not yet definitive. Ratna kneels beside one, brushing away the damp layer of moss to reveal a surface unusually smooth for a natural basalt. A shallow groove runs along one edge, stopping abruptly as if cut by intention. Photographs are taken, GPS coordinates logged, and the stone is tagged for later analysis. The team fans out, moving slowly, calling to one another when something catches the eye, a line of stones partially hidden beneath roots, a shallow depression in the soil that might mark a collapsed feature. They work without haste, knowing that each discovery, however small, needs to be documented in situ before anything is disturbed. The rhythm of the work is meditative. Step, pause, scan, note, repeat. By late morning, they have mapped enough to suggest that the anomalies were not a false reading. The stones form a loose alignment that arcs gently toward the main terraces. It is far from proof of a constructed pathway, but the geometry hints at purpose. One of the younger researchers, her voice barely above a whisper, wonders aloud if ancient visitors might have approached the hill along this route, guided by sight lines or ceremonial intent. Hillman does not dismiss the thought, but he cautions against building too much on a pattern that could still be the work of chance. As the day warms, the air grows thick and heavy, the forest pressing in from all sides. The team pauses for a simple lunch. Rice, dried fish, and water carried up in bottles slick with condensation. Sitting on the mossy stones, they talk in low voices, their words blending with the sounds of insects and the distant gurgle of a hidden stream. For a moment, the work recedes, and they are simply people in a quiet place, aware of the weight of time pressing from both past and present. In the early afternoon, they turn back toward the terraces, but take a slightly different route, looping around the slope. It is here, in a shaded gully, that they find something unexpected. A massive basalt block lying at an angle, its top surface split cleanly in two. The break is sharp, not the rounded erosion of centuries. Ratna studies it closely, noting that one half bears a faint, regular pattern of pitting, as though from repeated strikes with a hard tool. The other half, exposed to the elements, has already begun to soften under the slow work of moss and rain. The block is too large to have rolled far from the terraces without breaking apart, and its presence here raises questions. Was it quarried on site and abandoned mid-transport? Did it tumble down in some ancient landslide? Or was it placed deliberately in this gully, its function long since lost to memory? The team documents every detail, knowing that the stone's context might be as important as the stone itself. By the time they reach the terraces again, the light has begun to shift toward late afternoon, slanting golden across the basalt columns. From the summit, the forest they traversed looks like an unbroken sea of green, hiding whatever else might lie beneath its surface. Hillman stands quietly for a long moment, his gaze fixed on that stretch of canopy where the anomalies were found. He says nothing, but Ratna can tell he is already thinking about the next steps. Perhaps a ground-penetrating radar survey, perhaps targeted excavations once the proper permits are secured. The rest of the day is spent back at the summit, where another group has been continuing the detailed stone catalog. Each block is photographed from multiple angles, its dimensions recorded, its placement mapped in relation to the whole. This work, though less glamorous than the thrill of a new find, is the backbone of the project. Data that will allow future researchers to reconstruct the terraces even if they one day crumble. As the sun dips low, the team gathers near the uppermost platform. The air cools quickly here, and the scent of damp earth is replaced by the sharper smell of the evening breeze. They talk quietly about the day's discoveries: the flat clearing in the forest, the arc of stones, the massive split block in the gully. None of it is definitive, but all of it hints at a wider story, a network of features that could connect Gunung Padang to a landscape of meaning now hidden beneath centuries of growth. Down in the village that night, over cups of hot tea, the conversation turns to older maps of the region. Some show trails long abandoned, their lines fading into nothing. Others record the locations of ancient springs, shrines, and burial sites, markers in a sacred geography that might once have extended across the hills. The idea is not to prove a grand lost civilization, but to understand how this hill might have been part of something larger, a constellation of places where the earth and the sky, the human and the stone, were drawn into relationship. Outside, the night is moonless, the stars burning sharp in the blackness. From the terrace of the guest house, the silhouette of Gunung Padang is just visible, its lines softened into shadow. Somewhere in the forest below, the arc of stones sleeps under its blanket of moss, untouched but no longer entirely unknown. And in that quiet, the hill seems to wait, not for answers but for the next step in the long conversation between those who built it, those who tend it now, and those who are still learning how to listen. The 13th day begins under a sky the color of tarnished silver, clouds hanging low over the ridge. The terraces are damp, their stones slick with a fine mist that drifts in from the surrounding hills. The air is cooler than usual, and the subdued light makes the basalt appear darker, almost metallic. The team moves with a quiet deliberation, knowing today's work will be focused on one of the more delicate tasks, examining the deep-set joints between the terrace stones for trapped organic material that might still hold a datable record. Ratna begins with the upper platform, kneeling beside a block whose surface bears the faint indentations of ancient wear. Using a fine probe, she teases out the soil lodged in the narrow seam between stones, catching it in a small cloth to avoid contamination. It is painstaking work. Every movement must be slow, every tool sterilized before use. The collected samples will later be sifted under a microscope, each grain inspected for flecks of charcoal, plant matter, or bone fragments that could yield precious radiocarbon dates. Nearby, another researcher focuses on mapping the microtopography of the stone surfaces. A portable 3D scanner sweeps slowly across the basalt, projecting a grid of light and recording minute variations in height. The resulting model will allow them to analyze patterns of erosion, which can sometimes hint at whether the stones were shaped by human tools or left as they naturally fractured from cooling lava flows. Even subtle striations, too faint to see with the naked eye, can become clear under this kind of digital magnification. Mid-morning, Hillman calls for a pause so the team can examine a particularly unusual find. In one of the lower terraces, a stone has been uncovered whose surface bears not the usual hexagonal fracture pattern of basalt columns, but a deliberate-looking series of shallow depressions arranged in a loose spiral. The marks are weathered, nearly lost to centuries of exposure, but they stand out enough to stir speculation. Were they purely decorative, symbolic, or perhaps functional? A way to guide liquid or mark a direction? No one can say yet, but the stone is carefully documented, and a decision is made to cover it again with protective material after the survey is complete. The afternoon brings a shift in the focus of work. With the morning's samples packed and labeled, a small team heads to the northern slope, where older surveys suggested a possible alignment of stones outside the main terrace complex. The approach is steep, the path narrow, and in places the ground goes underfoot with a damp, sucking pull. When they reach the site, they find the stones partially obscured by earth and roots. Clearing them reveals that they form not a wall, but a low, narrow platform, barely knee-high, but stretching for several meters. Its purpose is unclear. It could have been a base for wooden posts long since vanished, a boundary marker, or simply an outcropping adapted by human hands. What strikes the team is its orientation. Compass readings show that the platform aligns almost exactly to the setting sun during the equinox, a fact that draws quiet murmurs. Alignments can be coincidence, but they can also be intention, especially in sites where the builders might have observed celestial events. Hillman, though cautious, admits that if the alignment proves consistent with other features on the hill, it could strengthen the case for a sophisticated design underlying the site's layout. Back at the main terraces, the wind picks up in the late afternoon, carrying with it a faint chill. The researchers return in small groups, their boots dark with mud, their clothes streaked from pushing through the damp undergrowth. The day's finds are gathered on a long table beneath the shelter. A scatter of small charcoal flecks in sealed vials, high-resolution scans of stone surfaces, and a series of measurements and photographs showing the northern slope platform. None of it is dramatic on its own, but together it forms another layer in the slow accumulation of evidence. As dusk settles, Ratna sits with Hillman, reviewing the catalog of samples. She notes the importance of redundancy, not just one charcoal fleck from a joint, but many, taken from different locations and depths, so that if one sample is contaminated or yields an anomalous date, there will be others to cross-check. The work may be slow, but it is the only way to build a timeline that will hold against scrutiny. In the village that evening, the conversation drifts toward the patterns they've been observing. The spiral depressions on the stone, the equinox alignment, the possible path in the forest. They are fragments of a puzzle whose complete image remains just out of reach. Over bowls of warm soup, one of the younger team members muses about how ancient builders, if indeed they shaped this hill, might have combined practical construction with symbolic or ritual considerations. Perhaps the terraces were not only functional, but also a map, a calendar, or a reflection of something in the sky. Hillman listens, but does not add to the speculation. His role, as he sees it, is to guide the team toward questions that can be answered without stripping away the mystery entirely. He knows that the allure of Gunung Padang lies not only in what might be proved, but also in what might remain just beyond proof. That night, a fine rain falls, tapping softly on the roofs of the guest house. The hill, unseen in the darkness, absorbs the moisture, its stones gleaming under the hidden moonlight. Somewhere beneath those stones, in the sealed pockets between layers, the organic traces of lives long gone lie waiting. And above, the same stars that may have guided ancient hands still trace their slow arcs, indifferent to the centuries, patient for those willing to look long enough. The morning arrives with a light that feels sharper, the clouds having retreated to reveal a pale blue sky stretching over the ridges. The hill is quiet, except for the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the occasional cry of a bird spiraling high above. Today's focus is on something less tangible than stones or soil, mapping the acoustic qualities of the terraces. It is an experiment that Hillman has been curious about for years, wondering whether the arrangement of basalt might have been designed to carry sound in particular ways. The team gathers on the uppermost platform, their footsteps sounding dull against the weathered stone. A series of calibrated speakers are set up at specific points along the terraces, each connected to a small recorder. One by one, they emit controlled bursts of sound. A low hum, a sharp clap, a sustained tone, and at various points around the hill, microphones capture how those sounds travel. The researchers stand quietly during each test, listening to the echoes bounce off the stone faces and slip into the surrounding forest. Almost immediately, they notice something peculiar. On the central terrace, a single clap echoes twice, once from the upper retaining wall, and again from somewhere deeper within the hill, as if the sound is resonating through hidden cavities. Ratna exchanges a quick glance with another acoustic specialist, both aware that such a phenomenon could hint at internal chambers or voids. Whether natural or engineered, these spaces would affect how sound moves, possibly by design. As the tests continue, they find that certain positions amplify voices dramatically. Standing on one particular stone at the edge of the upper platform, even a soft-spoken word carries clearly to the far end of the terrace. Move a single step away, and the effect vanishes. This could be coincidence, or it could be the residue of a deliberate layout, one that allowed leaders or ceremonial figures to address a gathered crowd without the need to shout. By mid-morning, they shift to the lower terraces, repeating the sequence of tests. Here, the acoustics are different. More muted, the echoes shorter, as though the sound is absorbed into the earth. Hillman notes the contrast, wondering aloud if different parts of the site served distinct purposes, some for gathering and speech, others for more private or contained activities. The possibility that the builders understood and manipulated these properties adds another layer to the already complex picture. After lunch, the team turns to the northern slope platform discovered earlier in the week. They run the same tests there, but the sound dissipates quickly, with no unusual resonance. The absence of acoustic enhancement could mean the platform was functional rather than ceremonial, or simply that it has degraded over time. Even the lack of a striking result is still data, part of understanding the hill's overall landscape. Returning to the summit, they find the light has shifted to a warmer tone, the basalt glowing faintly in the late afternoon sun. The final test of the day is the most striking. From the central stone on the upper platform, Hillman sings a single long note. Not a song, just a sustained vowel. The sound swells and seems to return in waves, as though the hill itself is giving it back. It is a fleeting effect, gone the moment he stops. but it lingers in the mind like the afterimage of a bright light. The evening's debrief in the village is unusually animated. The acoustic anomalies spark theories, some grounded, others more speculative. Could the terraces have been a place where rituals involved not just visual spectacle, but also sound designed to reach every listener? Could the builders have used drums, chants, or horns that worked with the hill's natural resonance? No one can prove it yet, but the idea is compelling enough to warrant deeper investigation. Ratna, ever cautious, reminds the group that resonance can occur naturally in many geological settings. Basalt's density and fracture patterns can create cavities that carry sound in odd ways without any human intervention. Still, she admits that the precision of some effects, like the amplified stone, feels too exact to ignore. She suggests combining the acoustic survey data with the 3D site scans, looking for structural correlations. As night falls, the conversation drifts to older accounts from the region. Some local elders recall stories passed down from their grandparents of gatherings on the hill where voices could be heard from far away. These memories are vague, likely colored by time and imagination, but they echo what the team has just observed. Folklore may not be a substitute for evidence, but it often preserves hints of something real. Later, when the group disperses for the night, Hillman walks alone up the darkened path toward the terraces. He carries no equipment, only a flashlight whose beam dances over the basalt steps. Reaching the upper platform, he stands in the center and listens. The forest hums faintly in the distance, and the wind moves through the stones with a soft sigh. He claps once, sharp, quick, and waits for the faint double echo. It comes just as before, and he feels a quiet satisfaction, not because it solves anything, but because it confirms that the hill still holds surprises. Back in the guest house, the others sleep, their notebooks filled with measurements and sketches, their minds already leaning toward tomorrow's work. In the darkness, Gunung Padang rests beneath its stars, the same sky that has looked down for millennia, perhaps listening to voices that are now only echoes in stone. And if the builders of this place understood how to shape both space and sound, then their intentions may be written not only in the patterns of the terraces, but also in the invisible paths along which the air itself moves. The next morning breaks warm and clear, sunlight spilling across the ridges in long, bright ribbons. Mist clings low in the valleys, but the terraces themselves are dry, their dark stones drinking in the light. Today's work turns inward, literally. The focus is on the deepest accessible layers of the site, where earlier drilling and core samples hinted at material buried far beneath the visible structure. It is not excavation day. Permits for such work take months to secure. Instead, the team will map every subtle depression, crack, and anomaly that might suggest an entrance or a weakened point in the stone layers, something to guide future digs. Ratna begins at the lowest terrace, kneeling to examine a seam where two massive blocks meet. The gap is narrow but unusually deep, and a thin breeze seems to drift from it. She leans close, feeling the faint temperature difference against her cheek. Air movement inside a structure can be a sign of interconnected spaces, perhaps voids between stone layers or even larger cavities. She inserts a slender fiber optic camera, its flexible shaft sliding into the darkness. The screen shows only rough basalt for several meters, then a space large enough for the lens to swing freely. Dust motes drift through the beam of the tiny light, suggesting an enclosed void. No one speaks for several moments, the weight of the find settling over them. Nearby, Hillman works with a portable resistivity meter, a device that sends small electrical currents into the ground and measures how quickly they return. Different materials, soil, stone, air, conduct electricity in distinct ways. The data, when mapped, can reveal hidden features. As he moves across the terrace, readings spike and dip, forming a pattern that aligns loosely with where Ratna's camera found the void. It is not yet proof of a chamber, but the convergence of evidence sharpens everyone's attention. Midday brings a shift to the southwestern edge of the complex, where the slope falls away sharply into dense vegetation. Here, the basalt columns seem less uniform, their arrangement disrupted as though by an ancient collapse. Some stones lean outward, exposing soil between them. The team clears a small area and discovers fragments of pottery, simple, unglazed, and heavily weathered. The sherds are too worn for decoration to survive, but their presence suggests human activity at this spot. Whether they were part of a living space, a storage area, or ritual offerings, no one can yet say. Lunch is taken in the shade of a large tree, its roots curling over the stones like frozen streams. The conversation circles back to the void discovered in the morning. Ratna is cautious, reminding everyone that voids can be natural, pockets left as lava cooled unevenly. Hillman agrees, but adds that the void's location and alignment make it worth closer study. If it connects to others beneath the terraces, it could mean the hill is more than a solid platform. It could be layered with internal spaces. In the afternoon, the focus shifts to integrating older data. The team sets up laptops under a temporary canopy, feeding in core sample records, seismic readings, and new resistivity maps. Slowly, a three-dimensional model of the hill takes shape on the screen. It is incomplete, missing countless details, but even in this rough form, it shows areas where density drops, hinting at hidden structures. The largest of these anomalies lies directly beneath the uppermost platform, where centuries of visitors have walked without knowing what might be underfoot. As the sun lowers, casting long shadows across the terraces, the team conducts one final survey of the day. They pace off precise distances from the suspected void and plant small, temporary markers in the ground. These will serve as reference points for when deeper exploration becomes possible. The work is quiet, almost ceremonial, each marker a small promise to return. Back in the village that evening, the discussion drifts into speculation. What if the void is artificial? A chamber sealed thousands of years ago? What might it contain? Tools, bones, inscriptions? Or nothing but the echo of human ambition, a hollow space meant to outlast those who carved it? Over tea, someone mentions ancient burial practices in the region, where important figures were sometimes interred in stone-lined vaults. The idea hangs in the air, tempting but unprovable. Hillman listens, then offers a reminder. The hill's greatest value may not be in treasures it hides, but in the story of its construction, its relationship to the land and sky, and the glimpse it offers into the minds of its builders. Even if the chamber is empty, the effort it took to create it would speak volumes about intent and capability. Later, when the village grows quiet, Ratna steps outside and looks toward the dark shape of Gunung Padang against the starlit sky. She imagines the builders here, shaping stone under the same constellations, knowing that much of their work would be hidden from view. Perhaps they understood that mystery itself was a kind of monument, something to draw the curious across centuries. The thought makes her smile, not because it answers anything, but because it means the hill is still doing what it was meant to do, make people wonder. Somewhere inside that mass of basalt and earth, air moves through unseen spaces. Whether those spaces were born of nature's cooling fire or carved by hands we barely understand, they wait in silence, patient as the stones above them. And tomorrow, the team will return to listen again. The day begins under a pale, diffuse light, the kind that flattens the landscape and softens every shadow. The air is damp, but not heavy, carrying the smell of wet leaves from the forest that presses close around the hill. Today's task is one of the most physically demanding yet, tracing the ancient pathways that may have once connected Gunung Padang to the surrounding valleys. The theory is simple. Monumental sites rarely stand in isolation. If the terraces were important enough to build, they were likely part of a larger network of movement and exchange. Hillman leads a small group down the eastern slope, where faint traces of a narrow trail disappear into the undergrowth. This is not the tourist path that now brings visitors up the hill, but something far older, barely visible except to eyes trained to read the subtle language of the land. The ground here dips slightly, forming a shallow trough that runs straight for several meters before veering toward a cluster of basalt outcrops. In places, stones are laid edge to edge, their tops worn smooth, suggesting they might have once been part of a paved surface. The team moves slowly, marking GPS points and photographing every feature. Insects drone in the background, and the forest is dense enough that the air feels still. At one point, the trail cuts across a small stream, where the stones form a crude but deliberate-looking crossing. The water runs clear over the dark basalt, catching glints of light through the canopy. Ratna pauses to collect a sample from between the stones, looking for traces of sediment that could be linked to human activity. Charcoal dust, bits of pottery, even pollen from cultivated plants long vanished. By mid-morning, the path leads them to a low rise where the forest opens slightly. Here, they find the remains of what could have been a small platform or rest point, a cluster of flat stones forming a level surface, partially sunken into the earth. Around it, fragments of burnt wood lie buried under a thin layer of soil. The wood is far too decomposed to handle without crumbling, so they note its location for later, more controlled recovery. It is tempting to imagine travelers pausing here, perhaps lighting a small fire before continuing toward the hill. Back at the main site, another group has been working along the southern slope, where an earlier survey suggested a different route might have approached the terraces. Their progress is slower, the terrain steeper and littered with loose rock. Yet here, too, they find hints of continuity. Stones aligned in a way that mirrors those on the eastern path, and small terraces cut into the slope as if to stabilize the ground. These might have been agricultural in nature, or they could have formed part of a ceremonial approach. After lunch, both groups reconvene to compare notes. The emerging picture suggests that Gunung Padang may have been at the center of more than one route, paths radiating outward like spokes from a wheel. This is significant because it supports the idea that the site was integrated into a broader cultural landscape, not just a local curiosity. Hillman points out that ancient routes often followed the contours of the land in ways that modern roads do not, and that retracing them can reveal connections invisible on maps. The afternoon is spent testing soil samples from the eastern path. Portable equipment allows for preliminary analysis, though anything conclusive will require lab work. Still, there are intriguing signs. Unusually high concentrations of phosphate, often associated with areas where people or animals gathered repeatedly over time. If confirmed, it could mean the path was not just a route of travel, but also a corridor of activity, perhaps even lined with temporary shelters or small shrines. As the sun dips lower, casting long shafts of light between the trees, the team returns to the terraces. The day's work has been more about context than direct discovery, but context is what turns isolated features into part of a living picture. Standing on the upper platform, Hillman traces with his eyes the direction of the eastern path, imagining lines of people winding up toward this place, carrying goods, offerings, or messages. The thought reinforces the sense that Gunung Padang was not built for the eyes of a single village, but for a wider community whose boundaries we can only guess. That evening, in the village, talk turns to how these paths might be recreated in a visual model. Ratna suggests overlaying them onto a satellite image to see how they connect with known archaeological sites in the region. Others propose that the paths themselves could hold ceremonial significance, the journey to the hill as important as what happened upon it. In many ancient cultures, processions were as much about the movement as the destination, the act of traveling a set route part of the ritual itself. Later, as the conversation winds down, Hillman steps outside. The night is clear, the Milky Way spilling across the sky like a river of light. Somewhere beyond the dark outlines of the hills, the paths they traced today disappear into the folds of the land, still there beneath the soil, patient as the stones above them. He wonders how many feet once pressed into them, how many voices rose in laughter or song on their way here. Whatever the answer, those footsteps have long since faded, but the lines they carved into the earth remain, silent guides back to a place that continues to guard its secrets. Dawn comes with a thin veil of mist clinging to the terraces, the stones glistening faintly with dew. The forest hums softly in the distance, a low, constant chorus that feels older than the hill itself. Today, the team turns their attention upward, not to the stones underfoot, but to the sky above. The question they want to explore is one that has hovered at the edges of the project for months. Was Gunung Padang aligned intentionally with celestial events? The idea is not without precedent. Across the world, from the pyramids of Giza to the megalithic circles of Europe, ancient structures often show alignments with solstices, equinoxes, or significant star risings. If the builders here shared that impulse, the terraces might form not only a physical platform, but also a kind of calendar written in stone. The first step is mapping sightlines from key points on the uppermost platform. Ratna stands at what they call the central marker, a large stone that rises slightly higher than the others around it. From here, she slowly sweeps a laser rangefinder across the horizon, noting dips between hills, sharp ridges, and any gaps in the surrounding forest canopy. Hillman watches the data appear on the laptop screen, forming a skeletal outline of the visible skyline. Mid-morning light floods the site, and with it comes a shift in the air. The clouds thin, the sun sharpens. This is ideal for testing solar alignments. The team uses a combination of compass bearings and GPS coordinates to track where the sun rises and sets in relation to the stone edges. Several points of interest emerge. On certain terrace lines, the sunrise appears to align almost perfectly with a notch between two distant hills. The effect is subtle today, but extrapolations suggest that at the equinox, the sun would rise precisely in that notch. The discovery draws a quiet ripple of excitement. If confirmed, it would suggest the builders observed and incorporated seasonal cycles into their design. The terraces could have served as a place not only for gatherings, but also for marking time, measuring the passage of the year through the dance of the sun. After lunch, the work shifts to night sky modeling. Using planetarium software, they input the GPS location of Gunung Padang and roll the clock back thousands of years. The simulated sky changes as precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, alters the apparent positions of stars over millennia. At around 11,000 years ago, a bright star, Vega, would have risen almost directly over the central marker at a certain time of year. Other bright points, possibly part of constellations important to early cultures, would have traced predictable arcs across the visible horizon. Hillman leans back from the screen, his voice low. If they could track Vega, that's a level of astronomical awareness we don't usually associate with this period here. Ratna nods, though she reminds him that correlation doesn't always mean intent. Still, the possibility is difficult to dismiss. Ancient builders didn't need modern instruments to observe patterns in the sky, only patience, repetition, and a reason to care. As the afternoon light begins to fade, the team sets up for an experiment they've been anticipating for weeks, observing the actual sunset from the upper platform. They've chosen this date because calculations suggest the sun will set almost in line with the western terrace edge, passing through another notch in the distant ridge. The sky begins to glow, shifting from pale gold to a deepening orange. Shadows lengthen across the stones, and then, for a brief moment, the sun's disk rests exactly in the notch before slipping out of sight. The effect is striking, not dramatic in the sense of a theatrical alignment, but precise enough to make coincidence feel less likely. In the stillness that follows, the team stands quietly, each of them aware they may have just witnessed something the builders themselves once stood here to see. Evening settles in quickly after sunset. The air cools, and the first stars prick through the darkening sky. They remain on the platform, letting their eyes adjust until the Milky Way arcs overhead, dense and luminous. Without the intrusion of city lights, the sky here feels almost tangible, a dome of infinite points. Ratna points out constellations, her finger tracing lines between stars, while Hillman watches for the rising of Vega, now faint in the early night. When it appears, he feels an unexpected pull, a sense of connection not just to the builders, but to every person who has ever looked up from this hill and wondered about the same lights. The stars haven't changed, only the eyes watching them have. Later, back in the village, the conversation carries a quiet excitement. If Gunung Padang was indeed aligned with both solar and stellar markers, it would mean the site functioned as more than a ceremonial or communal gathering place. It was also a tool for orienting life to the cycles of the cosmos. In a world without mechanical clocks or printed calendars, such alignments would have been vital for marking seasons, planning agriculture, or timing rituals. Hillman scribbles a note in his journal before bed. Perhaps the terraces were built not just to stand on the earth, but to point toward the sky. Morning begins with a restless wind sweeping over the terraces, stirring the grass between the stones and carrying the scent of rain from far off in the hills. The team gathers in the temporary field station they've set up at the base of the site. Maps are spread across the tables, laptops open, layers of data flickering in overlapping windows, geological surveys beside resistivity scans, GPS path tracings next to astronomical sightlines. Today is about weaving these threads together, looking for patterns that might tie the site's many mysteries into a single, coherent narrative. Hillman starts by outlining what they know. The geological core samples suggesting the hill is not a uniform natural formation, but a complex of basalt layers that may have been deliberately shaped over time. The seismic anomalies hinting at voids or chambers within. The stone pathways radiating outward, connecting Gunung Padang to a larger landscape. The possible alignments with equinox sunrise and solstice sunset. And now, the modeling that suggests stars like Vega once rose in alignment with the central marker. The question they keep circling back to is, why? What purpose could unite such diverse features? Ratna suggests that perhaps they are looking at a palimpsest, a site built in layers by different cultures over thousands of years, each adding to or modifying what came before. The geological age of the lower layers may point to a construction far older than the uppermost terraces, but even if true, that doesn't mean a single culture conceived it all. Instead, the hill could have been an evolving focal point, passed from one people to the next, each leaving their mark. The idea resonates, but it also complicates interpretation. A void beneath the terraces might have been a storage chamber in one era, a burial vault in another, and then sealed entirely in a later reconstruction. A solar alignment set by an earlier builder might have been partially obscured by later additions. Untangling such a layered history is like listening to a piece of music in which every generation has added its own melody without erasing the old. By mid-morning, the discussion turns to the broader environment. The team overlays their path maps onto topographic data, revealing that the eastern and southern routes they traced align with natural valleys that act as corridors between hills. These corridors could have funneled people toward Gunung Padang from multiple directions, reinforcing its role as a central gathering place. The proximity of streams and fertile terraces below the hill suggests it could have supported a sizable population nearby, enough to supply labor for building and maintaining such a structure. After lunch, the team revisits the acoustic experiments from earlier in the project, when they tested how sound travels across the terraces. Hillman replays recordings of a drum struck at different points on the upper platform. The echoes vary subtly depending on position, but in certain spots, the sound carries down the slopes with surprising clarity. They speculate that rituals here might have included music or chants designed to project outward, binding participants across the site in a shared auditory experience. If aligned with celestial events, the combination of light and sound could have created deeply symbolic gatherings, moments when earth, sky, and community converged. In the afternoon, rain finally arrives. It comes in steady sheets, drumming against the canopy overhead. Work outside halts, but inside the field station the conversation grows more focused. They begin to imagine scenarios: a dawn ceremony at the equinox, participants ascending along the eastern path, greeted by the first light cresting through the distant notch. Offerings placed on specific stones, the sound of drums and voices echoing across the terraces. The alignment of the hill, with a bright star marking the turning of the seasons. None of this can be proven outright, not yet. But as they layer the data, the vision feels less like speculation and more like a plausible reconstruction. The complexity of the site demands a purpose equal to the effort invested in it. Whether that purpose was primarily ceremonial, astronomical, political, or all at once, it was powerful enough to endure through generations. As the rain eases near sunset, the clouds break briefly, allowing a wash of golden light to spill across the wet stones. The terraces shine in the fading glow, their edges sharp against the darkening earth. Hillman steps out into the damp air, listening to the softened sounds of the forest. The site feels alive, not in the mystical sense, but in the way a place can hold the weight of countless human moments, layered until they form a presence that is more than stone and soil. Back in the village, as they prepare for the evening meal, Ratna reflects aloud. Maybe it's not about finding one answer. Maybe the meaning of Gunung Padang has always been the sum of its changes. A place can mean different things in different times and still remain the same place. Hillman nods. It's not the kind of conclusion that fits neatly in a report, but it may be the truest one they have. That night, the wind shifts, carrying cool air down from the higher hills. In the quiet, the hill stands dark and unlit, its secrets locked in basalt and earth. But for the first time, the team feels they are not just cataloging fragments. They are beginning to hear the shape of the story. The morning is unusually clear, the kind of crystalline air that makes distant ridges stand out in sharp relief. From the terrace, you can see the folds of the surrounding landscape stretch for miles, each valley and hill holding its own quiet history. The team gathers early, because today they will attempt something they have been preparing for weeks. A targeted ground-penetrating radar scan over the section where seismic readings suggested a large void beneath the surface. The equipment is wheeled carefully into position on the upper terrace, its antenna panels gleaming faintly in the first light. Hillman takes a moment to steady himself. Despite years of field work, there is always a particular tension before the start of a survey like this. The possibility of finding something untouched for thousands of years hangs in the air like a low hum. Ratna double-checks the calibration, while two assistants mark a grid pattern across the terrace, each line to be scanned with slow precision. The work begins in near silence, save for the steady whine of the radar unit as it moves over the basalt blocks. Each pass generates a strip of subsurface imagery, pale bands representing stone, darker areas showing gaps or softer material. Most of the images are predictable, matching the known layers of stone and fill. But halfway through the second grid line, the pattern changes. On the laptop display, a dark, irregular shape emerges several meters below the surface. It is not a shallow cavity or fissure, but a chamber-sized space, its edges surprisingly well-defined. Ratna leans in, adjusting the contrast to sharpen the outline. The void appears to have a flat floor and an arched ceiling, a geometry that suggests intentional shaping. The team exchanges a flurry of quiet words. Hillman studies the orientation, roughly aligned east-west, and the depth, perhaps 8 to 10 meters down. It is too deep to be a simple storage pit, and too regular to be a collapsed natural pocket. The scan shows no obvious signs of collapse, meaning it could still be structurally sound. By midday, after multiple passes from different angles, they have enough data to create a preliminary 3D model. The void appears elongated, almost like a narrow hall. At one end, the signal hints at denser material, possibly a stone wall or a sealed entrance. This detail sends a ripple of speculation through the group. Could it be a burial chamber? A ritual space? A sealed archive of some kind? Hillman reigns in the excitement. Accessing it will be complex and potentially dangerous. Digging directly down risks destabilizing the terrace above. Any entry would require careful planning, permits, and a strategy that balances archaeological value with preservation ethics. Still, the find changes everything. The possibility that something untouched lies beneath their feet adds a new dimension to the entire project. In the afternoon, they cross-reference the chamber's location with the rest of their data. Intriguingly, the long axis of the void is almost perfectly aligned with the equinox sunrise point they noted earlier. This could be coincidence, but if intentional, it suggests the chamber might have been designed with the same cosmological logic as the terraces above. The discovery sets off a wave of theorizing. If the chamber is ancient enough, it could belong to the earliest phase of construction, perhaps even predating the visible terraces. Later builders might have preserved its location out of respect, memory, or necessity, integrating it into their own designs. Alternatively, it could be a later addition, concealed under older layers to give it the authority of antiquity. As the day wears on, clouds gather over the hills, but the team works late, running one final scan before packing up. They store the data on multiple drives, the files labeled with both excitement and caution. That night, in the quiet of the village guest house, Hillman sits by the open window, listening to the wind in the trees. The stars are faint behind the incoming haze, but the sense of something waiting beneath the hill feels sharper than ever. He tries to imagine the hands that shaped that chamber, the sound of tools on stone, the flicker of light in a sealed space. Was it meant to protect what was inside, or to keep others out? Downstairs, Ratna is already drafting a proposal for a non-invasive probe, a narrow borehole equipped with a micro camera designed to capture images without disturbing the chamber. It will take weeks to secure the necessary permissions, but the team agrees it's the safest first step. For now, the chamber will remain unseen, locked away under meters of basalt and earth. But its presence changes the feel of the terraces above. Every step they take here now is on the roof of a space that has not felt human breath in perhaps thousands of years. And so, the mystery of Gunung Padang deepens. They have not yet opened the door, but they know where it is, and that knowledge is enough to pull them onward. The rain returned in the night, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the roof of the guest house until the early hours. By morning, a cool mist clung to the hill, veiling the terraces so they seemed to drift in and out of sight, as if the place itself were reluctant to be fully revealed. The team moved slowly, their steps quiet on the slick paths, carrying with them the weight of both discovery and restraint. They had mapped the chamber beneath the basalt, traced the alignments of stone to sky, followed the pathways through forest and ridge, listened to echoes bounce from ancient walls, and read the language of rock and soil as far as their instruments could reach. Yet the core of the mystery, the moment of direct contact with the minds that built this place, remained just out of reach, sealed under centuries of earth. Hillman stood on the upper platform, alone for a moment, the mist wrapping the stones in a muted glow. It struck him that perhaps this was as close as one could come to knowing the builders, not through uncovering everything, but by standing where they once stood, feeling the same wind, hearing the same forest, watching the same sun rise between the same distant hills. The stones themselves seemed to breathe with the patience of ages, reminding him that meaning here wasn't something to be seized, but something to be lived with. By midday, the weather cleared just enough for the team to take one last panoramic sweep of the site. They documented the terrace lines glistening from the rain, the forest beyond rolling away toward unseen valleys. The chamber below stayed locked in its silence, but now it was a silence they could name, mark, and plan to return to. That alone was enough to shift Gunung Padang from a vague enigma into a tangible chapter of human history, unfinished, but no longer invisible. As they packed up the equipment, Ratna paused to look back at the hill. "It's strange," she said quietly, "how you can leave a place with more questions than you arrived with, and still feel like you've found something." Hillman smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. In archaeology, in history, sometimes the greatest gift a site can give is the hunger to know more. The journey back wound through the familiar forest trails, the air now rich with the scent of wet earth and leaves. The sound of the river below grew louder as they descended, a constant reminder that landscapes, like histories, are always in motion. By the time they reached the village, the sun had dropped low, spilling amber light across the fields. That evening, over a simple meal, the conversation was less about data and more about possibilities. They spoke of future returns, of new technology that might one day read the buried chamber without touching it, of connections between this hill and others scattered across the archipelago. Beyond the table, the sky deepened into a vault of stars, and somewhere high above the terraces, Vega rose again, unseen through the night haze, but still exactly where it had been for tens of thousands of years. In the quiet that followed, Hillman thought of the first builders, whether they were a small community marking the sky for planting seasons, or a complex culture weaving cosmology and ceremony into stone. Whoever they were, they left something that endured long after their names and stories were lost. And in that endurance was a kind of message, even if the words were missing. The next day, they would leave Gunung Padang behind, but the hill would remain, waiting for the next hands, the next eyes, the next chapter in its telling. For now, it was enough to have walked its terraces, to have felt its presence, and to carry its questions into the wide world beyond. And so, as the night settled deep and the forest fell into its slow breathing, the story closed not with an ending, but with an opening, an invitation for anyone willing to look closer, to listen longer, and to wonder more. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, this is Deformed History, inviting you to keep exploring the hidden corners of our past, where every stone has a story, and every mystery waits for a curious mind to find it.